We found the largest battleship ever built. But what happened to it after it sank is something we still cannot fully study. Not because we cannot reach it, but because the ocean itself prevents it. On the 6th of April, 1945, thousands of young Japanese sailors were ordered aboard a ship they were never meant to survive. The Japanese battleship Yamato was not sent to win a battle. It was sent to die in one. Operation Tengo was, in plain language, a suicide mission disguised with formal military language, a last act of desperation from a navy that had already lost the war but had not yet been permitted to say so out loud. The plan was straightforward in its brutality. The Yamato would sail south toward Okinawa, where American forces had already landed, beach itself deliberately on the shore, and use its guns as a fixed battery until every shell was gone. After that, the surviving crew would go ashore and join the ground fighting, expected to die there alongside the army. There was no provision for retreat. There was no scenario in which the Yamato returned to Japan. There were 3,332 men aboard when the ship left port. Some understood the truth the moment the orders were read. Others pieced it together only after the coast of Japan had disappeared behind them. One officer spent that last night writing letters he knew would not arrive in time. A young sailor pressed the last 4 biscuits he owned into the captain's hands without words, as a man does when he has nothing else left to give. The captain, Kosaku Aruga, said nothing to reassure his crew because there was nothing honest left to say. He tied himself to the binnacle on the bridge so that if the ship went down, the ocean would have to take him with it. By morning on April 7, American carrier aircraft found the Yamato in open water with almost no air cover of her own. American pilots had learned from the sinking of Yamato's sister ship, Musashi. The previous year, they concentrated torpedo attacks on one side of the hull to prevent counterflooding. They hit the port side again and again, and the flooding grew faster than any damage control team could manage. Over the next 2 hours, the ship absorbed at least 11 torpedoes and 6 bombs. At 2:23 inches the afternoon, fires reached the forward ammunition magazine's 1,170 shells for the largest naval guns ever mounted on any warship in history, and the Yamato detonated in a single catastrophic explosion. The mushroom cloud rose nearly 20,000 feet. The blast was visible from over 100 miles away. Of the 3,332 men aboard, only 269 survived. 3,055 men went down with that ship. They are still there now in the wreck, in the debris field spreading out around it, in the sediment that has settled over everything across 80 years of silence. And the ocean closed over all of it, the steel, the history, the dead, the letters that were never sent and kept going, as oceans do, without acknowledgement and without pause. Most people who think they understand deep-sea shipwrecks think of the Titanic. They think of a hull still recognizable after more than a century on the seafloor corridors you can still enter, a bow still pointing forward through the sediment, as though the ship is still sailing somewhere slow and cold and dark. The Titanic gives you enough to build a narrative from. The structure is damaged and corroding, yes, but it is still legible. It still reads as a ship. Yamato gives you none of that, and the reason has everything to do with the difference between a ship that sank and a ship that was destroyed. The wreck lies at a depth of approximately 340 meters, roughly 1,120 feet, in the East China Sea, about 180 miles southwest of Kyushu, Japan. That depth is significantly shallower than the Titanic, which rests at nearly 3,800 meters in the North Atlantic. But depth alone does not determine how well a wreck survives or how thoroughly it can be studied. What determines those things is the condition in which the ship arrived at the seafloor, the biological and chemical environment surrounding it, and the practical limitations of every system we use to observe it. At 340 meters, pressure reaches approximately 34 atmospheres, 34 times what presses on your body at the surface. No natural light penetrates to the seafloor. Water temperature hovers just above freezing, typically between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius. And the water column above the wreck is not empty. It is filled with what oceanographers call marine snow, a continuous, slow precipitation of organic particles falling from the surface toward the seafloor. These particles carry a trace of the biological energy generated by photosynthesis far above, and they settle onto every surface they encounter, including the hull of the Yamato, at a rate that is slow in human terms but relentless across decades. Over 80 years, the accumulation is significant. This is the beginning of the system that makes the Yamato so difficult to study, because what those particles feed and trigger and set in motion is the reason the wreck is not simply sitting still in the dark. It is changing. It has been changing every single day since the afternoon it hit the seafloor in 1945, and the vast majority of that change has happened without a single observer present to record any of it. Yamato did not sink the way most ships sink. It was not overwhelmed gradually, taking on water until it slipped beneath the surface, more or less intact. It was destroyed from the inside in a single catastrophic moment, and what descended to the seafloor afterward was not a ship. It was a collection of fragments that had once been a ship, falling through 340 meters of water and arriving at the bottom in a pattern determined not by naval architecture, but by the physics of explosion and the hydrodynamics of large, irregular objects tumbling through deep water. When the forward magazines detonated, the energy propagated through the hull in milliseconds, finding every structural weakness simultaneously. Armor plating designed to withstand direct hits from enemy battleships failed when the force came from the wrong direction. The 18 1-inch gun turrets, each one weighing over 2,700 tons, heavier than many modern naval vessels in their entirety, were torn from their barbettes and thrown clear of the hull. The ship did not descend as a single object. It fragmented during the descent and arrived at the seafloor across a debris field stretching hundreds of meters in multiple directions. The first underwater survey, conducted in 1985 using the submersible Pisces II, confirmed what the explosion had done. The forward section lies on its starboard side, with the imperial chrysanthemum emblem on the bow still recognizable. The stern section rests inverted upside down with its keel crushed against the seafloor and its propellers missing. The massive gun turrets lie separately on the seafloor, displaced from their original positions at distances that indicate how violently they were ejected. A second major survey in 1999 extended the record. The 2016 digital survey produced the 9-minute footage now shown at the Yamato Museum in Kure, the chrysanthemum on the bow. The inverted stern, the scattered turrets settled into the sediment at odd angles over 8 decades. After watching all of it, a persistent feeling remains, the feeling of seeing the surface of something while the interior stays closed. Because what the footage shows is not a ship, it is the aftermath of a physical event. And studying an aftermath is an entirely different kind of problem from studying an intact structure. Here is the limitation that is rarely discussed in documentaries about deep-sea wrecks, because it is structural and unglamorous, and does not resolve into a satisfying conclusion. Every observation we have ever made of the Yamato, every photograph, every sonar return, every hour of video footage has been filtered through multiple layers of technology, and every layer introduces its own form of distortion. The distortions are not random, they are systematic, they compound. What we have is not a direct record of the wreck, but a representation of it, assembled from instruments that each carry their own limitations. Sonar maps the wreck by emitting sound pulses and recording how they return from surfaces at different distances. Broad surveys sacrifice fine detail. Narrow surveys miss the broader spatial relationships between sections. No single pass captures both simultaneously. The three-dimensional reality of the wreck, the way sections lean against each other, the way sediment has built up differently on different faces of the same component, is reduced to a two-dimensional acoustic signature that must be interpreted by someone who was not present at the seafloor. Visual observation depends entirely on artificial lighting, because no natural light exists below approximately 200 meters. At 340 meters, water carries a significant load of suspended particles, sediment, biological material, the fine detritus of 80 years of marine snow. In particle-rich water, artificial light scatters before it reaches the target. Contrast is reduced. Color is stripped from materials beyond a few meters. What looks like a flat surface in the footage may be a slope. What appears solid may be a shell of corroded steel surrounding an interior void. Remotely operated vehicles operate with communication lag. Navigation without GPS relies on acoustic positioning that carries its own margin of error measured in meters, not centimeters, which matters significantly when mapping a debris field. Every component of the observation system introduces uncertainty, and when those uncertainties stack on top of each other, the accumulated effect is that we are not observing the Yamato. We are receiving a translation of it, filtered through instruments that each distort in their own way, in conditions we cannot enter or remain in long enough to compensate for any of it. We can reach Yamato, but we cannot stay. And that distinction between the ability to visit and the ability to observe continuously matters more than almost anything else in understanding why the wreck remains incompletely known after 4 decades of effort. Human divers are excluded entirely. Saturation diving, used to keep divers working at extreme depths by pressurizing them to the ambient environment, reaches its practical limits well above 340 meters. The physiological effects of extreme pressure include nitrogen narcosis, high-pressure nervous syndrome, and gas absorption into tissues at rates that create serious decompression requirements. The limits here are not primarily a function of equipment design. They are a function of what biological tissue can endure. No advance in gear changes this in any fundamental way. The submersibles and ROVs that have visited the wreck have done so in windows measured in hours. A productive dive might deliver 4 to 6 hours near the wreck before the vehicle must ascend. The 1,985 survey lasted a few days of total dive time. The 1,999 and 2016 surveys added more. But between those visits, across the thousands of days separating each expedition from the next, the wreck transformed without any observer present. Steel weakened in ways no camera recorded. Sediment accumulated in volumes no instrument measured. Biological communities shifted as resources were consumed and replenished. The debris field settled further as material compacted under the weight of the water above it. All of it happened in the dark, in the cold, at 340 meters. None of it was recorded. When the next expedition eventually descends, it will find a wreck that has changed since the last visit, with no record of how or when any of it occurred. This is the fundamental scientific problem at the heart of deep-sea wreck study that no technology has yet solved. We are extraordinarily capable of visiting the deep ocean. We cannot yet watch it continuously, and the difference between a visit and continuous observation is the difference between a photograph and a film. The photograph tells you what something looked like at one moment. The film tells you how it moves and changes across time. The Yamato has given us photographs taken years and decades apart. What we do not have, what the deep ocean does not yet permit, is the film. At this depth, even steel does not follow the rules that surface experience would suggest. Corrosion in the deep ocean is driven not primarily by simple oxidation, but by microbial systems. Communities of bacteria adapted to extreme pressure, near freezing temperatures, and total darkness that metabolize iron directly, converting structural material into fragile mineral formations as a byproduct of their own energy production. On the Titanic, these formations, called rusticles, hang from the hull in long, stalactite-like columns, composed of iron compounds and biological material. Microbiologists have identified a complex ecosystem within them, multiple species of bacteria processing each other's waste in a chain of metabolic interdependence. The iron in the Titanic's hull is being consumed steadily and continuously. Scientists monitoring the rate have suggested the Titanic could deteriorate to the point of structural collapse within decades. The ship found in the 1980s is measurably less intact today, and the rate of change is accelerating as more metal becomes exposed and available to colonization. At Yamato's depth, and in the colder, lower nutrient waters of the East China Sea, the same class of organisms is present, but operates more slowly. Lower temperatures suppress metabolic activity. Lower nutrient concentrations limit population growth. Yamato's hull may appear more intact than the Titanic in some respects, but this is not preservation. It is simply a slower rate of the same destruction. The biological machinery consuming Yamato's steel has been running continuously for 80 years. What it has accomplished in that time, in the sections no camera has yet reached, is genuinely unknown. And over those 80 years, the wreck has become something its designers, crew, and destroyers could not have imagined. Microbial communities established themselves first. Invertebrates followed. Fish appeared, drawn by the structural complexity the wreck introduced into an otherwise flat and resource-poor environment. What was once the most powerful naval weapon of its era has become habitat infrastructure for a cold, fragile ecosystem that has no awareness of what lies beneath it. 3,055 men remain entombed within that system. Japanese lawmakers discussed recovering their remains in 2015. The effort was assessed as effectively impossible with available technology. The wreck is formally recognized as a war grave. The ocean has not acknowledged that designation. It continues converting the steel of a battleship into the substrate of an ecosystem, indifferent to every name and rank and letter that was written and never arrived. And there is still so much we do not know, not because the wreck is hidden, not because we have failed to look, and not because the technology has been inadequate in any simple sense. We do not know because the conditions of the wreck's existence make continuous, comprehensive knowledge structurally impossible. This is not a gap that will be closed by a better camera or a faster ROV. It is a gap that exists because the wreck is in a place that cannot be continuously occupied or continuously observed, and change does not wait for observation. It simply continues, in the dark, at whatever pace the local physics and chemistry and biology dictate. We do not know the precise structural condition of the wreck right now. The most recent comprehensive survey was conducted in 2016. Nearly a decade has elapsed. The steel has continued its transformation every day since without anyone watching. We do not know the full extent of the debris field. The seafloor around the main sections contains material that has not been photographed, measured, or cataloged. Some of it is structural, some of it is personal. The clothing, photographs, letters, and religious objects of 3,332 men, some sealed in compartments that have never been entered, buried under decades of sediment accumulation. We do not know the precise sequence of the explosion. Eyewitness accounts conflict with physical evidence. Whether it was the forward or aft magazines that detonated first, and what that sequence means for the fracture patterns visible in the wreck today, remains a genuine point of disagreement among researchers who have studied the available evidence carefully. The question is 80 years old. It is not yet settled. These are not small uncertainties at the edges of a body of knowledge that is otherwise complete. They are central gaps in what we know about one of the most significant naval losses in the history of warfare. The Yamato was the most powerful battleship ever built. It was sunk in under 2 hours by aircraft it could not effectively defend against. And now it rests at a boundary not between nations or between peace and war, but between what human knowledge can reach and what it cannot. We can find it, we can visit it, we can send machines into the dark to photograph it and bring the data back. And after all of that, it remains incompletely known because the ocean does not permit otherwise. What we have, in the end, is not the Yamato. It is the outline of the Yamato, a silhouette assembled from sonar returns and camera footage and survivor accounts and the physical logic of what a catastrophic explosion does to steel and crew and history. That silhouette is valuable, but it is not the thing itself. The thing itself is down there in the dark, 80 years deep in the sediment and the silence, still changing in ways that no one is watching, still holding within it the names and the faces and the letters that were never sent, and the 4 biscuits pressed into a captain's hand on the last morning of his life. The ocean keeps all of it, and it does not give any of it back completely. If you are drawn to the places where history sinks beyond reach, where science, time, and the structure of the planet intersect in ways that resist every attempt at full understanding, follow Sunken Realms deep, because what lies beneath the ocean is not simply lost, it is still becoming something we are only beginning to understand.